The head count never made sense. There were always 6. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It was as if someone was waving around a flare from space, faint but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We had all been friends since early middle school and were celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he had worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at a desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there, talking with Sally, my cousin. Both of them had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them, hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother, as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everyone in the group. So, Dave had gone to get some branches as we pulled out some folding chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly, and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys couldn't even be bothered to pull out a chair for me," Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working. As if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had realized why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched in worry and frowning in frustration, except for, "It's all right, I'll get the chair myself," Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry, and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. "There's 5, right? There's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head on, and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right, actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty, one for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after the long hike to get here and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills, despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. "Who started the fire?" I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again, I scanned the faces staring back at me. all barely illuminated by the light from the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person standing behind Jenny did it," Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall, dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. "Wait, I I don't know," Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down. "I think we should leave this place," Ava stuttered. "Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it," Dave said. "But it's so dark out in the forest now, we'd probably get lost if we leave now," someone else said. "Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow," Eric agreed. I tried to protest, but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. "Let's not sleep in our separate tents, just to be safe," Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought one-person tents with us, but we could squeeze two if we tried. That way, no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave and Sally, like always, went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I feel like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here?" Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and... I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent while the 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles in a sort of U-shape, so we could sleep as close as possible and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go to help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put a brave face on for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that none of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up, and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents we had left out and saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it. His head was in the center, his face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body was rolled around it, with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell. twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny, please," he said. I hesitated, but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point, there were 3 of us running on the trail, Dave and I shoulder to shoulder while someone followed us closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my rib cage and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what felt like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car and started it up, accelerating out of that forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. I'm typing this post out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service, and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I'm going to check why the person in my back seat has been so silent the whole time. I was in prison for 15 years. There was a skinwalker in there with us. A little background first, I was serving a 15-year sentence in a penitentiary in southern Arizona. What I was in there for isn't important. During my stay there were countless things that happened that no one could explain, and even more that no one wanted to know more about. It all started with a prison legend. Supposedly, years ago, something awful and unexplainable happened in the prison. Every morning we'd be woken up and expected to stand near the front of our cells while guards visually confirmed we were present and accounted for. Apparently, about a year before I got sent there, the most brutal and unexplainable thing happened during one of these routines. A man who had a cell to himself looked very off during this check. When a guard pulled over another guard to help him check it out, they found it wasn't actually the prisoner they were expecting at all. It was a totally different man. This man was wearing the skin of the other man over him. Loosely fitting, draped over him, he apparently looked like a real monster. The scariest thing was, though, that the guy wearing the skin was not an inmate. They had no idea how he even got into prison, let alone a cell. What's worse is that they couldn't even figure out who in the world he was. He wasn't documented anywhere. And what's worse than that, they never even found the body of the man whose skin he was wearing. Pretty grisly stuff, I know. And I realize that's not the go-to definition of a skinwalker, but that's what the prison called him. The skinwalker. Didn't help that the guy never talked, apparently. Anyway, that's what started the whole skinwalker superstition around the yard. Apparently the guy got shipped to a different spot about a month after it happened, and just about everyone in Gen Pop felt all the better for it. I heard about the story on the second day of my stay. Heck of a story to hear about a place that would be your home for the foreseeable future. Now onto the real stuff, though. Sure, that guy was the skinwalker, but all he did in the long run was get an old-lifer Navajo inmate to tell everyone about actual skinwalkers. It seemed like a lot of the prison culture actually revolved around them. Now, apparently, skinwalkers are tricky to point out on the spot, but if you manage to survive around one for more than a minute or two, almost everyone can tell the mannerisms are all off. They can mimic human speech, but not replicate it. They twitch manically. They have an unnatural gait while walking. But apparently, they got better with experience. The old Navajo guy, his name was Carl, said that he was sure there was an actual one among the prisoners slowly picking us off over the years. He called it the Grandmaster Skinwalker at one point. Apparently, he thought it had human mannerisms down so well that you might not even be able to tell if it was your cellmate for a day or two. It had to be good, he posited one night. He would expect a skinwalker to jump at any opportunity for a kill. But this one realized it had a revolving door of people to kill coming to it and masterfully bided its time, as Carl thought, for years. A lot of guys found humor in it. A lot more were really on edge about it. Every once in a while, in prison, people snap. Sometimes you'll find your cellmate swinging in front of your bunk, strung up around the neck by his pant leg. Sometimes you just can't take it anymore. But in our yard, people tended to snap in a very special way. It wouldn't be an outburst at dinner or a silent suicide in the night. Guys would just stop talking, hunch over, and shuffle around. Any friendships they had would be mostly out the window. They would turn into a loner during rec time, and they would let their hair hang in front of their face. No one liked to talk about it. Like if they did, it would happen to them next. I felt the same way. I didn't know if it was a skinwalker or just people going crazy, but I didn't want to find out. It wasn't clockwork or anything, but every time someone snapped in this way, it wasn't more than a couple of weeks before they were shipped off or transferred to God knows where without anyone else knowing beforehand. Then there were the nighttime occurrences. Short, loud bursts of sound echoed through my cell block during all hours of the night on a regular basis. It sounded like a mix between a pig's dying squeals and nails on a chalkboard. Just another thing no one liked to talk about. Even scarier were the shadows and footsteps. The block was dimly illuminated in the night by a few lights hanging from the ceiling outside the cells. I myself saw shadows flit across my walls on regular occasions, when there were definitely no guards near my cell. One time, near the end of my sentence, I woke up, looked at my back wall, and found a perfect silhouette of a person standing there. But when I looked, my bunkmate was asleep and no one was outside my cell. And the footsteps. Everyone hated the freaking footsteps. They were the scariest part. In the night, sometimes, more rarely than the shadows, you would hear ungodly fast footsteps. They sounded like wet feet slapping on a tile floor. Whatever caused them would fly from one end of the block to the other in a dead sprint. Whatever it was inhumanly fast. If you happened to be awake before it started, by the time you heard the footsteps on one side of your cell and whipped your head around to see the thing run by, it sounded like it was 3 cells past you. Everyone hated the footsteps. I agreed. I thought they were the worst. I was released from that place about a month ago, and I have more stories than I can count. I swear it was nearly my turn. About a week before I was discharged, my cellmate and a good friend of mine snapped in the same kind of way. I didn't sleep for an entire week. Well, I did sleep, of course, but never for more than a few minutes at a time. I never turned my back on the guy. The scariest thing? I woke up one night to him somehow snaking his body through the bars of our cell. For reference, I couldn't get anything past my shoulder through them. The worst part, though, was that he was coming back into our cell. On the day of my release, I didn't say a word to him. I just left. He seemed fine with it, so I was too. I had made it through 15 years of prison fights, gang disputes, and for all I know, skinwalker abductions. I left through the front gates, a free man. As I walked along the fence of the rec yard, I spotted my cellmate standing off on his own, like he had for the last week or so. I shook my head, not even really sure if it was him anymore. I took one last look over the yard, this time from the other side of the fence. I wish I hadn't. There, standing off on his own on the other side of the yard, was Carl, slouched over, eyeing the other inmates and twitching manically. I am a 999 police emergency dispatcher. I am a communications officer. When people dial 999 and ask for the police, I am the one they get through to. It's tough, I'm not going to lie. I wear a uniform. It's like a police uniform, but blue. I don't have a stab vest because we work in an office. We sit at huge banks of desks in lines with supervisors standing at the end of everyone. I have a headset with earpieces and a microphone and a computer in front of me. The light flashes. I press accept and I type as I ask questions. Name, location, incident category, assault, suspicious package, burglary, etc. I take all the details I can and categorize the incident by a level of urgency. If someone's come home and found their house broken into, that's not as urgent as a robbery in progress. I work 10-hour shifts with call after call after call. If I need to use the restroom, I have to raise my hand to get excused by the supervisor. They time you too. We get a huge variety of calls. Sometimes it's something and nothing time wasters. Sometimes you hear some absolutely awful things. My third shift, I got a call from a woman who was just screaming. She'd woken up from a nap and found her baby dead in its cot. I will never forget that, as long as I live. Losing a child is something you never get over. I know a few of the guys have started to drink a bit too much. Not alcoholics or anything, but every time they come home to a few drinks. It's the only way you can sleep. If I'm totally honest with myself, I can tell I'm slipping a little down that road. Last week I was working the night shift. It has a rep for being pretty bad. You get a lot of violent calls on the night shift. I'd been working for about 8 hours at that time. 2 more to go. I was surviving on coffee, shoving one call after another to the guys in dispatch. Then I got this call. The light flashes. I take a drink and click answer. Police 999, what's your emergency? All I hear is breathing. Now, this isn't that unusual. We sometimes get people who are running, panicking, confused. Sometimes people are injured. Sometimes they're trying to make a call without being heard. Police 999, my name is Laura. Can you tell me the nature of your emergency? No response. The breathing sounds like a woman, or maybe a child. I need to know your location and what's happening, then I can get help to you as soon as possible. Are you able to speak to me? There's a soft sound that comes then, like a scratching, like someone scraping their fingernail on the mesh surface of a microphone. I pause for a second, then collect myself. Are you unable to talk out loud? The scratching sound comes again. Scratch. Okay, let me see if I can help. 1 scratch for yes, 2 scratches for no. Do you understand? Scratch. Great. Like I said, my name is Laura. I'm going to get officers to you as soon as I can. Please stay on the line. I start waving my supervisor over, who spots me straight away. I point at the screen where he sees my typing. Caller is unable to speak aloud, attempting other communication methods. He nods, understanding straight away, and jogs over to the bank of IT guys. Are you injured? Scratch. Scratch. Are you in fear for your life or your physical safety? Scratch. Are you able to get to a safe place? Scratch. Scratch. I can see my supervisor talking to the computer guys who are trying to trace the call. From the time it's taking, it seems to be a mobile, so they have to go through the phone masts. Is it a person who is causing you to fear for your safety? Scratch. And a small intake of breath. Are they there with you now? Scratch. Scratch. But you are afraid that they will hear you? Scratch. Are you restrained in any way? Scratch. Scratch. Don't worry, I tell her. We'll find a way to get you help. Are you in a house? Scratch. Is it their house? Silence. Do you know where you are? Scratch. Scratch. Can you see a window to look out of? Scratch. Scratch. I was starting to panic a bit now. I'm highly trained, but you only get a few calls a year which strike you like this. I was starting to worry about my ability to help. If they don't know where they are and they can't speak to me, how can I send a car if I can't find out where she is? Then I hear something. The breathing gets quicker. Are you still there? I ask. There is no response. Can you let me know you're okay? There's a scraping, a scrabbling sound, and then the line goes dead. The call light flicks out, just an empty dial tone. I swear, not quite as under my breath as it should be. Looking straight over to the IT lads, I see them shaking their heads. No luck, no trace on the call. I work the rest of my shift feeling sick. It's mostly routine, but I just can't get that out of my head. See, as a comms officer, when something comes up like that, and you can't manage to find out where that person is, you feel responsible. If that woman is hurt or killed, then surely a lot of that's down to me. On the drive home, through empty city streets, I run that conversation through my head over and over again. I think what I could have done differently. I worry about that woman, where she is, what's happening. I get home, throwing my bag on the sofa. I pull a bottle of beer out of the fridge and pop off the cap, fixing the cat her dinner as she rubs around my ankles. That woman could be being raped or tortured, and we had an opportunity to find her and we didn't manage it. I had visions of a woman locked in a cellar somewhere, at the mercy of some pervert. I flopped down on the sofa, stuck the TV on, and slumped. I woke up half an hour later to the phone ringing. I stirred, blinking. It was dark still, just starting to get lighter. It was the home phone. Now, I almost never use the landline. I mostly just have it because it's the only way I can get Wi-Fi. This has got to be something bad. My mum, maybe, who hasn't been well. I drag myself to my feet and head as quickly to the phone as I can, fumbling with it and pressing it to my ear. Hello? There was nothing. Just breathing. My stomach drops. Hello? Without the background noise of the office, without the tapping keys and the voices of the other officers, I can hear more clearly. My stomach knots. I feel like I might vomit, the beer churning. Anna? I ask. Scratch. Are you... This isn't funny. Scratch, scratch. I swallow, mouth dry. Is it... Baby, are you safe? Scratch, scratch. I feel the panic bubble over. I can barely form my words. Baby, please tell me, wherever you are, whatever I can do, please tell me. Scratch, scratch. Where are you? Scratch, scratch. I can hear her. Those tiny, soft, whispering breaths. Then one catches, a sound of panic, a scraping on the floor. Anna. And then she replies, Mummy. And then the phone cuts out. The caller withheld their number. She's called back every night since. Every night is the same. No answers, just her little breaths and the scratches on the floor. However many times she calls, I will answer. Every time. Perhaps one night I will be able to find some way to help her. 7 times she's called. 1 call for every year of her life. 1 call for every year she's been dead. A 911 operator, warning you to stay safe. It's kind of a running joke in my office that I always get the weirdest calls, and it's true. One of the more interesting ones I got was from a drunk guy who meant to call the cops and was trying to file a noise complaint about his own party. While some of my calls can be pretty strange, they're usually fairly tame. I've been pretty lucky because I haven't had too many disturbing or sad stories to tell from my years working as a 911 operator. If you're looking for something like that, I can point you to several of my colleagues because, unfortunately, there's no shortage of those in this industry. The call that particularly sticks in my mind is one that I had about a year or 2 ago. I can honestly say that it's one of the most frightening experiences of my entire life, and I think it's going to stick with me forever. It had actually been a fairly slow afternoon that day. I know it sounds kind of insensitive, but if you're not taking a call, this job can get pretty boring. I got stuck covering my friend's evening shift, and I didn't expect things to get more interesting. I was counting down the minutes until my shift ended when a call came through my line. I put the headset on and ran through the usual script. 911, what is your emergency? I asked. I think there's someone in my house. The voice sounded like it belonged to a young child. My heart sank. Calls from children were always the worst. We're trained to get as much information from each caller as possible. This makes it easier to more fully understand the situation, as well as figure out which emergency services we need to dispatch. What's your name, sweetie? I kept my voice calm and upbeat. There was no need to scare them any further than they undoubtedly already were. Elizabeth, she said softly. I think she might have been crying. That's a beautiful name. Mine's Amelia. Even though I didn't show it, I was beginning to get nervous. This is very important. Can you tell me what's happening right now? The line was quiet for a moment, but then Elizabeth started talking. I think someone's in my house. Where are your parents? I asked. They're not home. I'm not sure where they are. I was pretty angry when I heard this. What kind of parents leave a little girl home alone this late at night? Is there anyone else there with you? Yeah, I think they're looking for me, Elizabeth began, but her voice abruptly stopped at the very end of her sentence. Had it not been for her quiet, frightened breaths, I would have thought she, or whoever else was there, hung up. They said my name. She was definitely crying now. Where are you right now? I heard a door close. In my parents' closet. She spoke a little louder now, probably thinking that the intruder wouldn't be able to hear her from in there. I hoped she was right. I was glad that she knew to hide. A lot of kids freeze up in dangerous situations like this, especially if their parents or an older sibling aren't there. I asked her for her address, which she gave to me, but for the sake of privacy, I will only say that Elizabeth's house was in a fairly nice neighborhood in my area, and it wasn't far from the police station, which was very helpful. Elizabeth, just focus on my voice. I need you to try and relax. I'm sending the police to your house right now, and they should be there in about 5 minutes. Can you hold on until then? Even though I would usually try to get a little more information about the intruder, I always tend to err on the side of caution when children call 911. I'd much rather send someone and have it be a false alarm than risk their safety. Elizabeth did not answer my question, and it took her longer than I was comfortable with to respond. When she did, it was only one word: listen. I heard the phone crackle as she brought it away from her ear and held it out in front of her. At first, I didn't hear anything, but as I focused on the background noise, I noticed a lot of whispering. I couldn't tell what they were saying, but it definitely sounded like it was coming from more than one person. I hoped the police would get there on time. As much as I help people with my job and as many lives as I've saved, it is always so frustrating that I can't do anything myself other than wait and talk. Elizabeth's voice came out in hushed sobs. He's coming up here. Please help. The police are almost there. I need you to be quiet so he doesn't hear you. You're going to be okay, sweetie. I promise. She seemed to calm down a bit. Everything was quiet for a moment, save for the whispering, which was much louder now. I still didn't know what they were saying, but I was sure it was coming from multiple people. I could pick out at least 3 distinct voices. When I heard a door creak open through the phone, my heart leapt. Elizabeth screamed, and I knew that the intruders had found her. I was so scared for her, and I desperately hoped that someone would be there to help soon. Are you okay? I need you to tell me what's going on. I was trying and failing to stop my voice from cracking. I couldn't let her know that I was afraid. There's a man, Elizabeth whispered. He has really long legs and a really big smile. My imagination was running away from me. I pictured this poor girl alone in the closet as an impossibly tall man towered over her. I heard another bang coming from somewhere in the house and someone yelling, "Police!" Thank God. I could hear Elizabeth crying as the whispers intensified. I still didn't understand how she only saw one person. There had to have been more than 4. He isn't touching the floor. The line cut off. I frantically tried to re-establish the connection, but no matter how many times I tried, I was met with only silence on the other end. I would like to close with a message to any parents reading this. Please, please don't leave your young children home by themselves. I haven't heard anything about Elizabeth or her family in the year since this happened. The police only found the phone. Someone we didn't know joined our camping group. I was the first to notice an extra person had joined our group. I counted 6 of us sitting around the campfire, but I knew we had left home with 5. The 6th person had joined us somewhere along the way, but where and when exactly, I could not be sure. All the glowing faces looked familiar, like I had known them all for a lifetime. That was why it took so long to find the man out of place. I had to go through the faces one by one. I went through my history with them, recounting how I met them, how I knew them. I fit each one into my memories like puzzle pieces. First, there was Mark. He was sitting next to Sarah, chatting her up as always. I met Mark and Sarah 6 years ago in the 10th grade. Mark and I played wide receiver together on the school football team. Sarah was a cheerleader, and Mark always had a thing for her. The 3 of us started hanging out after games, Mark flirting nonstop, and Sarah always hilariously rebuking him after a while. Then there was Ben. We had been best friends since the 1st grade, inseparable ever since we bumped heads playing tag during recess. He had his arm around his longtime girlfriend, Justine. She started at our school when she moved from Chicago in the 7th grade. Ben sat next to her in English, and soon she became a part of our group at the time. She was quiet and shy when she first arrived. But once we got to know her, she opened up. She was one of the coolest and nicest people you could ever get to meet. She had also become close with Sarah in the past few years. And then there was the 6th face, the piece that did not fit. I stared at him, and his name escaped me. That is if I ever had it in my memory banks in the first place. He looked familiar, but I could not place him in my memories. But why, if I recognized him, could I not remember his name? Why did he sit among us, acting as if he belonged? He stared at Mark and Sarah as they chatted. He laughed when they laughed, smiled when they smiled. I couldn't figure it out. The question burned in my head. How had he, a stranger, joined our little group without any of us noticing something amiss? "Yo, Porter," Ben pulled me from my thoughts. "Your head up in the clouds or something? I was just telling Justine about our 5th grade teacher. What was his name again?" "Mr. Smith," I said. "Oh yeah, Mr. Smith. I was telling Justine how you could rile that guy up like nobody else. Remember that time you handed in an assignment printed in yellow ink?" Ben and Justine laughed. "Yeah, I remember," I said. I can still see the steam coming out of his ears. They laughed again, and I joined in half-heartedly. When I glanced the strange man's way, he was watching us, grinning. He was always watching, always on the periphery, never partaking. Part of the reason he had flown under the radar. I was struck with the sense that he was studying us. My skin crawled. Ben drained his beer and threw the empty can in the cooler. "Well, I gotta take a leak," he said, and walked into the woods, swallowed up by the dark. "You really know how to push people's buttons when you want to, huh?" Justine said. I shrugged. I was having trouble focusing on the conversation. The weight of the situation, the reality of it, was starting to hit me. A strange man had attached himself to our group unnoticed, and who the heck knew what his motivations were? Questions raced through my mind. None I could answer. How had no one else noticed yet? Why had it taken me so long to notice? Was I going insane? Did I have amnesia and forget this one friend of ours? What in the hell was going on here? The strange man stood with jerkiness. "I gotta take a leak," he said. It was the first time I heard him talk. He spoke with an odd lisp. It sounded as if he had to force the words from his throat. He walked with an awkward gait and, like Ben, disappeared behind the dark veil of the trees. No one else flinched. Justine kept talking. "I always loved the long relationship you and Ben have. It was so hard moving cities and leaving all my old friends behind. I mean, I can't complain too much. I wouldn't have met Ben and all you guys otherwise. Justine, don't you see what's going on here?" "Huh? You're telling me you haven't noticed?" "Notice what, Porter? What are you talking about?" "Who was that guy?" I gestured to the vacated spot the strange man left behind. "Oh, him. He's, She trailed off. She frowned into the fire. I could see her mind ticking over, and her eyes twinged with concern. I knew I wasn't going crazy. "I don't know," she said. "Who is it?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." We stared at each other. "Maybe—" Justine was cut off. An ear-piercing screech came from the woods. It sounded like a shrill, injured cat. A large cat. The sound split the air and cut our conversations short. A blanket of silence fell over the 4 of us. Only the crackling campfire persisted. The woods were still and quiet. "What the heck was that?" Mark broke the silence. "I don't know," Sarah said. "I've never quite heard an animal like that before." "Sounded like some messed up mountain lion," Justine said. "You ever heard anything like that before, Porter?" I shook my head. My fingers tingled with adrenaline. Ben was still in the woods, and the strange man was out there with him. Dread filled my gut. "There's no mountain lions out here," Mark said. "It's probably an elk. They can make some creepy sounds." Sarah agreed. Justine bit her lip and scanned the woods. "It's probably okay. I think Mark's right," I said to her. But I wasn't sure I believed it. Mark and Sarah had started up their conversation again when the strange man bumbled out of the woods. They paid him no mind. I was hoping something would have triggered in them by now, but they were oblivious. The strange man took a beer from the cooler. He fumbled with it, struggling with the tab. It was as if he had never opened a can before. When he finally had it open, he sat, beer in hand, and continued to watch Mark and Sarah, a thin smile on his face. He never did take a sip. I watched him from across the campfire, his head wavering behind the heat. I touched on what made me uneasy about this strange man, aside from the fact he had managed to infiltrate our group without any of us noticing for a long time. He moved with jerkiness and awkwardness, like a newborn animal. Nothing he did was smooth or well practiced. It made everything he did look like an act, an imitation. I didn't make the connection at the time, but I should have seen this man was not quite human. But at the moment, I wasn't sure what to think. I guess I just thought he was a freak. I considered calling him out then and there. I wanted to ask him just what the heck he was doing. But I'll admit, I was scared. I had visions of this guy being some horrific serial killer, and I didn't know how dangerous he was or if he was armed. I didn't want to push him into doing something drastic that got us all killed. As time went by without any sign of Ben, I became convinced the strange man had done something to him. I watched him plotting, planning, and marking his next target. Anger sprouted from my fear, and I started to see red. I needed to stop him. We used an axe to chop firewood for our campfire, and it was leaning against my seat. This man was dangerous. I was sure of it. I convinced myself I needed to do something before another one of us was next. I clutched at the axe's handle. The smooth wood felt reassuring in my hand. Justine touched my arm. "Porter, where's Ben? I'm getting nervous." "It's okay," I lied, patting her hand. "I'm sure everything is okay." I stood with axe in hand. "I'm going to get some more firewood," I announced more awkwardly than I hoped. Okay, dude," Mark said. "Porter?" Justine's voice wavered. Speaking up was a mistake. I had drawn the attention of the strange man. I walked past him, trying to act as nonchalant as possible, but I was never a good actor. He watched me the whole way. He maintained his glare as I reached the perimeter of the woods, and as he looked back, his head rotated around an unnatural distance. That was enough to chill my spine. I was hoping he would turn around to look away and give me an opening, but he never did. I'm not exactly sure what happened next. I never saw him stand up and walk over to me. I never even saw him move a single muscle, but in an instant he was standing in front of me, inches away from my face. It was as if he teleported. A metallic smell stung my nose. The strange man stunk of blood and copper. The axe trembled in my hand. Any thought of actually using it fled my mind. I locked into place, my skin covered in goosebumps. Power radiated off him. He spoke to me. "Get some firewood," he said in his forced tone. And he smiled wide. At that moment, Ben emerged from the woods. "Ben!" Justine cried. "Jesus!" Ben said as Justine squeezed him. "Did you guys hear that cat thing?" "We think it was an elk," Mark said. "Where were you? Why did you take so long?" Justine asked. "I guess I wandered too far off and I lost sight of the campfire. It took me a bit to find my way back. For a second, I thought I was going to have to freeze my ass off out there alone tonight." The relief washed over my body like a wave, crashing into my muscles. I felt each one relax. At least Ben was safe. I looked for the strange man, but he was gone. He somehow slinked away while I was distracted. He was good at going undetected when he wanted to. My thoughts turned to getting out of there. Even though Ben was unharmed, that guy was still trouble. I started back towards the group and caught the middle of their conversation. "I don't know, actually. Yeah, who was that guy?" Ben said. "I thought that he was with you guys," Sarah said. "Yeah, isn't he your friend?" Mark added. "I thought he drove over with you three." "No," Ben said. "I don't know who he is." The panic spread over everyone's faces. They were finally feeling what I was feeling. The realization had set in. "We need to get out of here," I said, "before he comes back." "Yes, please," Justine said. "We have to leave now. That guy was a freak, right, Porter?" "Yeah," I said. I explained to them how I noticed he was the odd man out when we were sitting around the fire. I explained the odd behavior, and they all agreed the guy was strange and possibly dangerous. None of us could pinpoint exactly when he had joined the group. He had slipped in unnoticed and unaccounted for. It was uncanny. We packed our tents in record time. We trekked the 15 minutes to our cars through dark woods, flashlights in hand. We heard the screech of the elk again, if it was an elk, which I have my doubts about now, and we took some comfort from the fact it sounded farther away. Even so, we picked up our pace for the final stretch of the walk. I felt like I could finally relax behind the wheel and locked doors of my SUV. Justine and Ben sat in the back, while Mark and Sarah followed behind in Mark's beaten-up Ford Laser. We were heading out of the woodland and were planning to shack up in a motel for the night before heading home in the morning. I thought we were free and clear. We wound our way around the dark roads that snaked through woods. I let a smile open up my face when we finally reached the exit road. It was an arrow-straight stretch of asphalt that split through the last few miles of woodland. I pressed on the accelerator. I couldn't wait to get the hell out of there, and I think Mark was feeling the same way because he sat close on my rear bumper. I remember thinking, at least we'll have a strange tale to tell after all this. I didn't think it was about to turn into a horror story. The trees and the dashed lines on the road blurred past us. My headlights reached out for the seemingly endless road, and my speedometer needled its way towards 100 miles per hour. I don't know what possessed me to go that fast, and I wish Mark didn't follow my lead. It was a mistake. The strange man appeared from behind a tree. He walked into the middle of my lane. I slammed the brakes. It was too late. The next sequence of events happened so fast it plays like a slideshow in my mind. The tires screeched, and there was a smell of burning rubber. The strange man folded over my bonnet and got sent flying down the road. He skated across the pavement on his back, moving with such speed it looked as if he was gliding on ice. More tire screeching. Mark flew past in the opposite lane, fishtailing. He fought it, and for a moment I thought he had it saved, but the car hooked right into the trees. The sickening sound of crunching metal reverberated in the air. Mark's car slammed into a tree, driver's side first, sending fragments of glass and metal flying. The car bounded off one tree and into another. The front passenger side impacted this time. The front light exploded and the passenger side cavity caved in, sending a wheel bounding into the woods. The crumpled heap of a car came to a rest. Justine was the first out the door, crying out Sarah's name. Ben went after her, and I followed after him. Everything felt surreal as shock coursed through my body. It was as if I was watching through a screen. I floated over the asphalt as Justine and Ben sprinted towards the steaming wreckage. The crash scene dimly lit by my SUV's one remaining headlight. There are two screams I'll never forget. They imprinted themselves on my brain, and I'll hear their echoes at night forever. If I happen to get Alzheimer's later in life, I know the last thing to go will be these screams. The first one I heard when I was 13. It came from my mother. It flooded the house, splashing off the walls. I ran out of my room to see her crumpled at the front door, with 2 police officers standing by. They had notified her that her eldest son, my brother, had died. The second came from Justine when she saw what was waiting for us in that Ford Laser. Mark was unrecognizable. He was a shattered mess of bone, skin, and blood, melded and intertwined with the crumpled steel. Sarah was blinking slowly, her breathing labored. Her one arm shattered, broken in too many places to count. Her legs crushed at knees from the front of the car, which crumpled back into her leg space. Her legs would have been flat if I could see them. Justine turned away and fell to her knees, face buried in her hands, shoulders heaving. Ben tried to comfort her, but he had to turn away and throw up off the side of the road. I pulled out my phone and struggled to dial 911. With my fingers shaking, I kept pressing the wrong numbers. My voice was small and distant as I explained what happened to the operator. She told me to stay on the line, but as I looked down the road, I dropped my phone. The strange man was standing there. His grin reached from ear to ear, showing a grandstand of teeth. His shoulders shrugged up and down as if he was laughing. In fact, the creep was laughing. If I were not in shock, I would have gone after him right then and there. I would have torn his heart, if he has one, right from its chest. But all I could do was stare, mouth agape, struggling to keep the tears behind my eyes. The strange man started for the woods. I watched him go, and I watched him change. I saw it. I know I did. This was no illusion, no trick of the mind. This was real. I saw him shapeshift. I saw its true form. We were not dealing with something human that night. After countless hours of research, I believe I saw what others have called the goat man. Its horns stuck out unevenly from its head. Its grinning snout bared rows of sharp teeth. And walking upright, like a man with an awkward gait, it vanished into the shrouded woods. It has been 8 months since that night. I've only seen my friends a handful of times since then. Our relationships have shattered and are left in ruin. All we are now to each other is a stark reminder of that night. Mark is dead. Sarah survived, but as a triple amputee. Justine and Ben broke up. And here I am, rugged with a scraggly beard and uncut hair after spending every sleepless night researching the monstrosity I saw that night, the goat man. I'm going back to those woods. So help me God, I'm going back. I'm coming for the goat man, and I'm not stopping until one of us is dead. My parents were the type of people who seemed so perfect that you couldn't help but wonder what kind of skeletons they had in their closet. They spent their Saturdays in soup kitchens, Sundays in church services, and weeknights delivering meals on wheels. My mom, dad, and sister Julie created a freaking a cappella group called Songs for Our Seniors to perform in nursing homes. You would think there had to be something more. Humans weren't endlessly kind, and everyone had their sins and secrets. But 10 years ago, when I was 12 years old, it was easy to believe my parents were just good people. And they were. I wasn't oversaturated with the endless scandals I see now in the news, the ones committed by the perfect couple no one would ever suspect. I wasn't the opposite of my parents. I was no devil, but I wasn't a great kid either. I acted out a lot after I was diagnosed with Stargardt disease, a form of juvenile macular degeneration. In short, I was mostly and legally blind. It's not terrible. I listen to audiobooks, write with talk to text, and believe it or not, live a pretty normal life. Maybe I'm hard on myself, but it's hard to live up to my parents, whose biggest flaw was that they were gullible. I suppose when you're a saint, it makes sense that you'd assume the best in people. So even when we were on our yearly vacation at the cabin my aunt lent us in northern Minnesota, it was no surprise that they still found a cause they could donate to. Jamie! The screen door clapped and my mother rushed into the rustic den. We ran into the loveliest people on our hike. They told us this way their church has been spreading awareness for different issues we'd never even thought of. I had stayed behind to watch TV. Hiking wasn't my favorite activity, being legally blind. Mom, please don't give strangers you met in the woods your money. She laughed and bent to kiss my head. My son's so funny. They didn't ask for money. They're signing people up for a vow of silence. I rolled my eyes. A vow of silence? Do I have to do it too? No, she said, disappointed. You don't have to if you don't want to. But they said our vow can be in the name of whatever we want it to be. The point is to make a sacrifice, and what better place to do it than out here? She gestured widely with both arms. The great outdoors. How long would it be? I asked nervously. Oh, just for the night. A few hours. Don't worry. I nodded. I was worried. It sounds silly, but being mostly blind, I didn't do much nonverbal communication with my family. I wouldn't be able to see any reassuring smiles as we sat outside in silence. Julie walked in with my dad. Hey, little brother. She came over and kissed me on the cheek. I'm going to bake some banana bread, half the loaf just for you. Why couldn't I have a sister that ruffled my hair and called me twerp like in the cartoons? Why did everyone in my family have to be such better people than me? That evening, just before dark, I dangled my feet off the dock while I watched what I could of the sunset. If it could just stay like this, I thought. If my vision didn't get any worse, I could still see some beauty in the world. I came inside to my parents and Julie putting on their shoes. Jamie, there you are. My dad came over and plucked something out of my hair. We'll be back in 20 minutes. The vow of silence starts at the church where we say our prayers beforehand. You don't want to come, do you? I shook my head. Didn't think so. S'mores when we get back. Think you can get a fire going? Yeah. Great, champ. They seemed anxious and excited to leave, which wasn't like them. I remember thinking that maybe there was something they weren't telling me. A rarity. Be back in a jiff. A jiff, it wasn't. An hour went by with no sign. I called all three of them, but all their phones went to voicemail. The second time I called my mom, I was out by the fire after getting it started. I froze and brought the phone down slowly as I thought I heard a ringing far away in the woods. A part of me suddenly didn't want to reveal where I was, but I shouted anyway. Mom! There was a rustle and a thud in the distance. Mom? Dad? I started to back up, and soon I was sprinting. I tripped in the dark on the way to the door and got a minor concussion and a face full of pine needles, but I made it inside. I could hardly see a thing out the windows at night, not even shapes. There was the slight glow of the dying fire in the distance, but that was all. I sat by an open window and listened. A few minutes went by and there was a sound like the creak of a rope under pressure. Then all quiet and crickets. I thought something was horribly wrong, but 15 minutes later I saw their headlights dancing down the rutted drive and I had to keep from crying in relief. I waited for them on the porch and listened to the car doors slam. "That wasn't 20 minutes," I yelled, while they were still 50 feet away. No response. Of course not. Afraid by their lateness, I had forgotten about the stupid vow of silence. As a blind kid, the vow of silence was scary to me. I had this fear of not knowing whether my family was really my family when I couldn't hear them speak. But as they got closer, I was reassured. My mother's birthmark on her cheek, my father's big nose, the smell of Julie's shampoo, they were all here. I sighed in relief. But something was off. My family seemed like they were all in shock. Even if they couldn't speak, I still expected them to be their bubbly selves. They were stoic and slow-moving, as if they were possessed. And I realized, frowning, they hadn't told me what the vow was for. I had a fire started, but it went out. My mother put her hands on my shoulders and patted them, and my father started towards the fire pit. She then took my hand, and we walked together through the woods to join him. Soon, there was an enormous fire. My dad kept throwing logs and dragging great dead branches into it. "Whoa," I said as logs popped and shot sparks. "This is a fire." Julie came out with a paper bag from the kitchen, and I salivated, remembering s'mores. Things felt back to normal, and as the stress of the last 2 hours left, I felt immensely tired. The lonesome cry of a loon came from across the lake, and I closed my eyes and slept. It couldn't have been much later when I woke. I wasn't a very big 12-year-old, and my father was holding me out in his arms towards the fire. "Dad," I shouted. "Dad, what are you doing?" My heart began to race as I realized maybe my perfect family wasn't so perfect. Or maybe they believed strongly in what I thought all along, that I wasn't perfect enough for them. The shape of my mom appeared in front of me. Her eyes seemed set much deeper in her face, and she ran a wet thumb across my forehead and across. "Mom, Dad, please," I whimpered. My dad scooped me so I was cradled in his arms and started towards the house, my mom and sister in tow. I tried to calm myself. Maybe this wasn't a sacrifice. Maybe my parents just got a little too invested in one of their acts of charity. But then I saw something. They were close, but I was still too blind to be sure. At the edge of the firelight, I saw what seemed to be the shapes of bodies hanging from the trees. They swung gently at the ends of nooses. My dad kept carrying me to the house and into my bedroom. My mom peeled back the sheets, and as I was gently laid on the mattress, Julie tucked the blankets in around my neck. Then, one set of cold lips after another kissed me goodnight. The three of them walked to the door and stood just a few feet away in the hall light. Just as I thought that my dad seemed to be a few inches taller than I remembered, they placed their hands on their chins and they peeled away their faces as if they were masks. They turned off the hall light and vanished in the black. Mom, Dad, Julie. But I knew then as well as if I had seen it with perfect clarity, that my parents and sister were hanging in the trees with their faces sawn from their skulls. I didn't hear them walk away, and as I sensed them stare at me from the dark, I laid in bed crying quietly in terror, wondering the same thing then as I do now each and every day. Who were those people? I put my head under the covers as I heard the floorboards creak as they watched me. Who were those people that wore my family's faces? The phone call from my daughter led to the most terrifying experience of my life. It's always been one of my biggest fears as a parent to get a sudden phone call from my kid in the middle of the night. The type that causes you to lurch awake in a panic when you see their name light up on the phone screen, and last week I experienced that for the first time. It was by far one of the most horrifying nights of my life. It's obviously no secret that kids like to party in high school. I did it plenty myself, and I'm sure I gave my parents a lot of sleepless nights when I was growing up, and now I guess it's my kid's turn to return the favor. My son just started his junior year of high school, and there have been a few incidents regarding him being at parties, coming home drunk or stoned, and getting a few tickets from the police. He's a good kid though, and has thankfully never been in serious trouble, and hopefully things will remain that way. I've been stern with him, but I also understand that this is pretty normal behavior for teenagers. My daughter is a freshman in high school this year, and up until now has remained relatively clean in terms of the usual high school antics. My wife and I, of course, don't condone underage drinking or partying, but we know it's likely going to happen, regardless of what we say. We both agreed long ago that we would always do our best to educate our kids on the dangers and try our best to influence them away from that lifestyle. I've had numerous talks with both my son and daughter about this, and made sure to reiterate that I don't want them partying, but I'm not able to control their entire lives either. My request that I have repeated ad nauseum to them is that if ever they are in danger or in an unsure situation to please call me. I don't care what time it is or where they are, I will go pick them up. No questions asked and no grudges held. Better that than them getting into the car with some underage drunk driver or something. Because we've all heard the horror stories of people's lives being forever changed by one stupid decision. My son has never once taken me up on that offer, and I hope that means he's been responsible. Until last week, my daughter hadn't either, but I'm glad she did, even though it ended up being one of the most terrifying nights of our lives. My phone began to blare loudly on my side table, stirring me from a deep sleep. With a stark sudden nervousness, I leaned over and silenced the annoying tone, squinting with a pirate eye stare at my bright phone. The name Amelia illuminated brightly on my screen, and immediately my heart sank. It was just past 2 a.m., and everyone knows nothing good ever happens that late at night. Hello? Dad? Hey, I'm sorry to call so late. No, it's fine, honey. What's up? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. We were driving home and my friend's car broke down. Is there any way you could come pick us up? My heart breathed a small sigh of relief then, and I tried to gather my mind. I told her I would of course come and get her, and over the next few minutes she described her location as I got myself dressed. She was a good half an hour drive away and basically just on the side of a rural stretch of road. She didn't mention what exactly they were doing out there, and in the moment, it didn't cross my mind to ask. I pulled my truck out of the complex maybe 10 minutes later and texted Amelia that I was on my way. Thankfully, the roads were clear at 2 a.m., and I was well on my way to her in no time, making much better time than the drive would have normally taken me. Only then did I start to realize they probably could have just called roadside assistance and requested service. Would have saved me a long drive on a work night, but after all, I'd always told Amelia to call me if she needed help, and I'm glad she did. After entering the highway, I felt my phone begin to buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and once again saw an incoming call from Amelia. Dad, are you almost here? She spoke suddenly as I answered, a distinct nervousness obvious in her voice. Yeah, about 10 minutes out. Is everything okay? She paused on the other end of the line. I heard one of her friends say something in the background, but I couldn't decipher what it was. Dad, there's somebody out here. There he is, down by that post. Another girl spoke from the other end. What do you mean? Is someone threatening you? I heard them whisper on the other end of the line as I feverishly anticipated a response. Dad, something's wrong. The line then abruptly cut out. I glanced at my phone to see that the call had failed. After trying and failing several times to call her back, I eventually gave up due to lack of service. My heart was throbbing in my chest, and an increased desperation caused me to stomp down harder on the gas pedal. A few minutes later, my phone began to buzz in the center console once again, and once again it was Amelia. Hello, Amelia, are you there? Dad, something's wrong. I'm almost there, Amelia. Hold on, are you safe? What's going on? There was no response from the other end of the line. Sometimes when I have bad reception, people can call me and speak, but they can't hear me respond. I figured that's what was happening until she spoke again. Dad, something's wrong. I felt a wave of chills roll down my spine as I heard it. Something about the situation really had me unnerved then. The way Amelia spoke, it was exactly the same every single time, almost like it was a recording. The area she had told me they were located was about 15 minutes away from the nearest town on the way to a patch of wilderness. A lot of people go there for camping and whatnot, but the roads were near empty that night. Endless rows of trees lined either side of the road, and a cold sweat dampened my brow as I stomped on the gas pedal. Finally, as I rounded a bend in the road a few minutes later, I spotted something up ahead, a lone Subaru Outback on the opposing side of the road. As I got near, I squinted to see better, but saw no one inside. I was fairly certain that was one of Amelia's friends' cars, and since I hadn't seen any others, I figured it had to be them. I pulled my truck up behind it, and my headlights beamed through the back window, but I saw no one inside of it. Amelia? I called out from my window, but got no response. I killed my engine then, grabbing my Glock 19 from under the seat and stashing it in the back of my pants. The chilly air gnawed against my skin as I stepped out into the road. An eerie silence subsumed me as I glanced around the environment. The back left tire on the Outback was completely flat, and I figured that's why Amelia had called. I hoped that's all it was, but the fact she wasn't there distressed me greatly. "Amelia?" I called out, hearing my own voice slash through the dense, silent night. I checked my phone again, but found it was displaying the searching message in place of the bars. The inside of the car was empty when I looked through it, and I shuddered to imagine what could have possibly possessed them to leave their car. None of the possible answers, I concluded, were good. I called out to her a few more times as I searched around the area but never got a response. On the side of the road, I noticed something lying in the wild grass. As I got closer, I realized it was a purse with a bunch of items spilled out of it. I didn't think it was one of Amelia's, but it was obviously not a good sign. "Amelia?" I screamed her name at the top of my lungs, but again, there was no response. Something was very wrong about the situation. It felt like I was being watched, but that could have just been my growing apprehension. The discarded purse clearly indicated that whoever it belonged to probably went out into the woods. I knew what I had to do, but the fear that overcame me when I considered going into those woods was among the strongest I've ever felt. Every instinct of self-preservation in me was screaming for me to not go into those woods, but my little girl was out there, and fleeing was not an option. I made my way to the tree line and entered the woods. The only light I had on me was my phone's flashlight, and it wasn't much. It was at least better than making calls, though, and surely better than nothing. Each step I took seemed to crash like thunder when contrasted with the eerily silent night. Each dried leaf was like a glass vase shattering on impact, and I did my best to move as quietly and efficiently as possible. The Glock remained in my right hand at all times, with my head on a shivering swivel as I persevered onward. In the distance, I started to hear the sounds of trickling water. There was nothing really indicative of anyone having been in there, so I decided to just go towards it. I thought maybe one of them was bleeding and went to the water to wash off a cut or something, even though that would be a terrible idea. By that point, I was just internally scrambling for answers or any sort of clue I could find. A minute later, I stumbled into a small clearing and found the brook I'd heard earlier. The small stream extended in a wavering path both directions with thick foliage covering much of the bank. On the other side was a small incline which led deeper into the woods, but once again, there was no immediate sign that anyone had been out there. I really started to panic then, but calling out seemed like a worse idea every time I did it. At the same time, I had to do something. My mind just wouldn't stop racing about some lunatic serial killer or human trafficker. Every father's worst nightmare. After a few moments, I finally decided to turn around and head back towards the road. As I veered back, I stepped by the bank and was able to see around the small bend in the creek. On the other side of an angled tree, I saw something that made me nearly jump out of my skin. Someone was crouching there on the edge of the stream. It was a young woman with dark hair dressed in a hoodie and blue jeans. As I lifted the light towards her, I realized I recognized her. Natasha. Natasha, hey, can you hear me? Are you all right? She didn't react at all as I made my way over to her. She was just crouched there in a sitting fetal position, staring up the incline on the opposing side of the stream. Natasha, hey, it's Amelia's dad. Are you okay? Where's Amelia? Natasha again didn't react in any way. As I finally shined the light on her face, I just saw her staring emotionlessly. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were like saucers, dilated so heavily that no color was visible. Considering it was night, that wasn't entirely strange on its own. But what was strange was that I noticed her pupils didn't shrink at all when I shined the light on her. Natasha. I put my hand on her shoulder, but again got no reaction. I could tell she was breathing, but clearly she wasn't all there. She seemed entirely catatonic, like she was trapped in some sort of hypnotic state. I shook her by the shoulder, called her name, and even flicked water on her from the stream, but she didn't react in any way whatsoever. It was really unnerving, but selfishly I was still more worried about Amelia. I thought about just letting her wait there and returning for her, as she obviously wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, but the dreadful idea occurred that it may be too late for Amelia. The thought alone nearly crippled me with horrific contemplation, but I knew I could at least get one girl out. I wrapped my arms around Natasha and lifted her off the ground. Her arms were wrapped around her legs, and she maintained that position as I lifted her into my arms. Her skin was cold to the touch, and with her locked position, it almost gave the impression that she was frozen stiff. Thankfully, Natasha was rather small, so I was able to carry her back towards the road with little issue. A minute or two later, I got back to my truck and placed Natasha in the back seat. Her utterly silent demeanor and complete lack of reaction had really started to worry me. Just to be sure, I felt her pulse on her neck, and as I anticipated it was there, feeling pretty much normal. After loading her into the truck, I locked it and resumed my search for Amelia. It was then I noticed that the back left tire on the Outback was not only flat, but absolutely shredded. It looked like it had been flat, but they continued driving on it for several miles. The tread was torn open, revealing the silver rim underneath. As I was inspecting it, I suddenly thought I saw something under the car. As I leaned down, I once again got a jolt of pure terror. Amelia, are you okay?" There she was, lying prone underneath the car. Like Natasha, she was unresponsive no matter how many questions I asked her. I could see her back moving rhythmically up and down, so I knew she was breathing. Her eyes were pinned open wide, and like Natasha, her pupils were like saucers. I had to basically drag her out from underneath the car, all the while. She didn't react in any way whatsoever. She too just appeared in this dazed state, like she was thankfully still alive but not fully conscious. I've never seen anything like that with her or anyone else before. As soon as she was out from under the car, she suddenly lurched and wrapped herself into the fetal position. It startled me greatly, and I thought it meant she was back to normal, but after questioning her again, I still got no reaction. Thankfully, that made it much easier to carry her, and I got her loaded into the truck as well. Natasha still sat there as she had before, and the sight of both of them curled up and unresponsive like that really chilled my veins. As I rounded the back of my truck, I then came upon an incredibly worrying discovery. The back left tire on my truck was suddenly flat as well. A few dozen curse words slipped liberally from my lips as I debated my options. Unfortunately, the jack was underneath the back seat where Amelia and Natasha were. I spun back, eyeing the opposing side of the road and the foreboding and unwavering tree line. Someone was messing with me, and I prayed that's all they were doing. Considering the state of both Amelia and Natasha, however, that didn't seem very likely. As I began retrieving the jack and lowering Tool from underneath the seat, something suddenly caused me to freeze dead in my tracks. I don't know how to explain it, but every single hair on the back of my neck stood up at once, and a wave of chills rolled down my spine. My knees shook and my heart thundered in my chest. It was like some dormant sixth sense buried deep within me suddenly sensed danger, but danger isn't even a strong enough word for it. It was this utterly hopeless, paralyzing sense of impending doom with corporeal manifestations. Like some ominous presence was enough to rattle me to my very core, and it was so unfathomably consuming that even the fight or flight response ceased being an option. I was just entirely stricken by terror, like some primal instinct deep within me had suddenly reawakened and set off all the alarm bells at once. I'd been anxious the whole time I'd been there considering the circumstances, but it was nothing compared to that horrendous sense of crippling fear. I glanced frantically around the vicinity, but nothing appeared immediately wrong. Nothing I could see, that is. I really wish I had the words to properly convey the feeling, but at the same time I don't, because I truly hope no one ever has to experience that feeling. "Dad," Amelia's voice suddenly called out, but it wasn't Amelia who had spoken it. It came from the opposing side of the road. My heart sank like a lead weight in my chest as I spun back to face the arboreal blockade. I saw nothing. I heard nothing aside from that familiar voice and uncanny tone. "Dad, something's wrong." I didn't think my heart could sink any lower, but as those words pierced the obsidian night, I was proven wrong yet again. It was Amelia's voice again, and it was spoken the exact same way I'd last heard it on the phone. "Dad, something's wrong. Dad, something's wrong. Dad, something's wrong." The voice seemed to distort the more it repeated. My legs finally resumed function beneath me, and I had seen enough. I just got back into the truck, with my hands trembling so badly that I struggled to hit the push start. Finally, I did, and the truck fired back to life. Outside, I heard the voice repeating, but it seemed to change location every time it did. The first few were off to the left of us on the opposing side of the road, but then it came from behind me, then up ahead with only a few seconds interval between each repetition. Branches then snapped over to my left, and something emerged from the woods. Suddenly, I felt woozy, lightheaded, and like I was about to pass out. My vision swam around me, and it suddenly felt like I'd just shotgunned a handle of Jack Daniels. It wasn't like the feeling of being drunk, though. It was something far more terrifying than that, like my very sentience was being drained from my body. The thing emerged fully from the woods, looming like a shadow on the periphery of my mind. I can't even begin to describe it, not only because of my extremely blurred state of mind, but because it just feels wrong to do so. The more I stared at it and acknowledged its existence, the worse it got. It was like my feeble human mind wasn't fully capable of comprehending the things my eyes were beholding. I saw other things in the woods, or at least I think I did. So much of this feels like a dream now. It's crazy to even transcribe it. It's like I don't know whether I can even trust my own account of the events anymore. Something was out there, though, something truly horrible. I could feel the claws of utter madness scraping against the last frayed remnants of my mind. Its mere presence alone was threatening to tear me from reality and send me spiraling into a dazed delirium the likes of which I would never recover from. Somehow, I managed to move the shifter into drive, and with no regard for the flat tire, I slammed my foot down onto the gas pedal. It felt like driving with a fishbowl on my head while being upside down. My reactions and muscle memory were just disoriented beyond belief. I have no doubt I was swerving all over the road worse than Lindsay Lohan after a birthday party, but thankfully there was no one else around. The tire flapped relentlessly, creating an irritating cacophony and causing my truck to handle terribly, which of course only added to the aforementioned difficulties. By some miracle of fate, I managed to keep the truck on the road for a long enough time. The delirious sensation seemed to lessen the further away I got. After several minutes of driving, I felt mostly back to my normal state of mind. The sigh of relief I breathed then was probably the largest and most cathartic of my life. A few minutes later, I pulled my shrieking truck into the hospital parking lot. By that point, the tire was almost entirely disintegrated off the rim, and I probably ruined my differential, but none of that mattered to me. I ran inside the hospital and got some of the staff at the front counter, telling them I had 2 girls with me that needed help. The staff followed me out, and I picked up the still unresponsive Amelia from the back seat. The security guard picked up Natasha, and we carried them back inside. The nurses asked me what had happened as we got them into hospital beds, but I didn't even know what to tell them. I ended up just saying most of what actually happened and that I'd found them in the woods. The staff eyed me warily, and I could tell they didn't trust me. I don't blame them either, as I did show up with 2 underage girls in the middle of the night and under very strange circumstances. I doubt they'd ever seen anyone in conditions like that. The girls very much appeared like they'd been drugged, and although I told them I was Amelia's father, I don't blame them for being suspicious of me. Even as the police showed up and began questioning me, I forced myself to remain calm for the sake of Amelia. They asked me what had happened, and I told them pretty much everything I've written here today, but in the most rational terms I could explain. I told them I thought someone had abducted and drugged them, but I didn't see who it was. No way they'd ever believe the more worrying details of the experience, though. The cops kept me there in the lobby, not arresting me, but not allowing me to be with Amelia either. Eventually, I called my wife, and she arrived at the hospital a little while later. I then had to explain everything a 3rd time to her, and she was able to substantiate my claims. The cops eventually radioed into their dispatch and requested officers to go and investigate the scene where I'd found Amelia and Natasha. My wife knew something was up with me. She knew I was rattled by the experience. She tried getting me to tell her more when we were alone, but I told her I'd tell her everything later. One of the nurses came out a little while later and informed us that both girls had been sedated and were now sleeping peacefully. I asked if they had found anything wrong with them, but they said everything was normal as far as they could tell. My wife went back to see them, but the cops didn't want me going, considering their suspicions. It was annoying, but I'm trying my best to be charitable to their point of view here. I'd much rather have cops that took young girls being brought in under mysterious circumstances seriously, even if it meant suspecting me. That's a far better option than them shrugging it off and not caring much about it. I was exhausted by then and ended up falling asleep on the lobby couch not long after. I had some pretty severe nightmares then, but I can't consciously remember the details of them now. My wife shook me awake some time later. As I opened my eyes, I saw the sun had risen, and the lobby had many other people coming and going. Finally, I was permitted to go and see Amelia, and thankfully she seemed fully conscious and back to her normal self. The same was true for Natasha, whose parents had also showed up to see her. Thankfully, both girls were cleared to return home a few hours later with a full bill of health. In the following days, more details would be added about the case, but unfortunately, most of them have just made all of this more difficult to understand. Amelia and Natasha both tested negative for common drugs like roofies used to incapacitate victims. They drug tested me as well, but as expected, it also came back negative. There's always the possibility that they, and even possibly I, were drugged with a more exotic substance that is not normally tested for, but up until now, there's no real evidence of that. On the following morning, the cops went and checked out the area where I found the girls. Natasha's car was still there in virtually the same state I'd found it in. They searched the surrounding woods but weren't able to find much of relevance. As of now, I've been cleared of any wrongdoing in the case, but that doesn't mean things have been resolved. The cops questioned me extensively about the night, and I tried to help them in every way I could. I even told them that I thought I'd seen someone approaching my truck as I fled, but stopped short of implying anything beyond that. If you've read all of this, then you may be of the same assumption that I am, and come to a similar, but far more unbelievable conclusion. There was something unnatural about that night, and although I hesitate to use the word paranormal, I'm really struggling to find a better word for it. Amelia has no memory of what happened to her. She said that the last thing she remembers was Natasha pulling the car over after they got a flat tire. She doesn't remember crawling under the car or me carrying her to the truck. The next thing she actively remembers was waking up in the hospital, and Natasha's account was pretty much the same. I've had some horrific nightmares these last couple of days. Nothing in particular that I can recall, just distorted visions of horrific creatures and people along with violence and suffering that caused me to lurch awake in a cold sweat. Amelia's had them too, and I suspect, though I'm not certain, that Natasha has had the same. I'll be honest, some of the things Amelia has told me lately really have me worried. She said she's seen things that she knows aren't there and heard voices she knows don't exist. Based on the things she's mentioned, I'm starting to get worried that she may be schizophrenic. She's never had these issues before that night, and I really hope it isn't the case. I don't have a good explanation for what happened that night, and all the research I've done hasn't helped much. As of now, I'm hoping I can just write this event off and move on with my life, but I have a horrible feeling that it won't be so easy. If anyone has any theories about what on earth happened that night, please share them. I am open to any and all potential explanations. One thing I do know is that whatever it was I saw that night is still out there, and that thought terrifies me more than anything else. My brother found a 10-legged spider. He said he found it in the wheat field in our backyard and had taken it to school for show and tell. I picked Max up from his elementary school each day, and it was always interesting to see what show and tell item he carried into my car. Today it had been concealed. He cradled a cardboard box in his arms, flaps duct taped shut, several little holes poked into the top with a pencil to allow for airflow. "There's no such thing as a 10-legged spider, Max," I said. "Yes, there is," he exclaimed. "I counted his legs and he has 10 of them. Mrs. Blackwell doesn't know what to make of it. She said spiders are only supposed to have 8 legs. "She's right," I said. In truth, the only 10-legged animals I could think of were crustaceans, none of which lived in the field behind our house. "I'll show you," said Max, struggling with the duct tape on the box. "Don't open that," I said. "I swear, if you let that thing out in my car, Mom is going to ground you for a month." As we pulled into the drive of our quiet farmhouse, I chalked the whole thing up to Max miscounting the limbs. His second-grade counting skills weren't all too refined, and I'd heard some spiders had pedipalps that looked like legs but weren't. All things considered, I remained convinced there were no such things as 10-legged spiders. By dinner that night, I was no longer thinking about the spider in the box. I had almost forgotten it until Max brought it up again. "I found a spider with 12 legs today. I named him Shiny," said Max. My parents looked at each other across the dinner table, confused. Clearly, this was another figment of Max's unending imagination. "That's very interesting, sweetheart," said Mom, covering her stuffed mouth. "But spiders only have 8 legs. Haven't they taught you that in school?" "Not Shiny. He has 12. Ronnie Huggins says it's like a 4-leaf clover and it means good luck." "You said he had 10 earlier," I told him. "Quit lying, Max. Nobody's going to believe you found a spider like that." "I did," he said. "He grew 2 more legs since earlier, dummy." "Max, don't call your brother a dummy," Dad grunted. "Admit it," I said. "You didn't find a spider like that. Admit it." "You're wrong," bellowed Max. He hopped from his chair and bolted up the stairs, each step a defiant stomp. At last there was a muffled door slam and then silence. Nobody was eating anymore. After a while, I scooted my chair back and said, "I'll go check on him." Upstairs, I found Max's bedroom door locked and could hear faint sniffling from inside. I knocked and cleared my throat. Listen, I'm sorry I didn't believe you earlier. I'd love to take a look at your spider. Mind if I come in?" The door opened and Max stood there, his eyes red, nose leaking snot. He sniffled again. "It's not that, Ryan." He lifted the cardboard box from earlier, but it was no longer a box. It had entirely come apart. In one of the sides was a hole the size of a dinner plate. "It's Shiny. He's gone." "Right," I said. "Of course he is." "It's true." "Max, I said, bending to his level and inspecting the box. "You can't possibly expect me to believe a spider did this. It looks like you tore a hole in it." I expected another outburst from Max, but instead he shrank back into his room, face screwed into a scowl. "You'll see," he said. "When Shiny gets big enough, he'll kill you. And Mom and Dad, too." He slammed the door in my face. I pounded it with my fist, but he wasn't going to open it. That night, I retired to my room and fell asleep, certain that Max was making the whole thing up. But if that was the case, why did I feel a lump forming in the back of my throat? I awoke to a jarring shriek from downstairs. I leapt out of bed, tangled in blankets, and danced on one foot while I tried to slip on a pair of jeans. I pulled a shirt over my head as I stumbled into the hallway. Just a short ways ahead was a trail of blood leading directly to the staircase. I bolted down the stairs, careful to avoid puddles of the stuff, certain that I was about to come face to face with a massive 12-legged spider. What I found instead was my mother in her nightgown, hands over her mouth, standing directly over the corpse of our Yorkshire Terrier. We'd called him Yip Yap. Yip Yap lay on the living room rug, his insides splayed out for all to see. Besides fur and entrails, there wasn't much left to recognize. I leaned over and picked up Yip Yap's collar, examining the small metal tag that hung from it. I ran my thumb over it, smearing some sort of black goo. The trail of blood didn't stop at Yip Yap. It continued through the living room and into the kitchen, where it disappeared behind the door to the garage. It was slightly ajar. "What happened?" said my father, rushing down the stairs. He stopped when he saw us, his eyes bulging. "How did this happen?" he whispered in a hoarse voice. There was a small gasp from behind us. We turned to see Max, the only person who could have had anything to do with this. "Don't look at me," he said. "Shiny did it." "Shiny isn't real," I shouted at him. "I don't know what you did that caused this to happen, but I'm going to find out. And when I do, you won't see the outside of your bedroom for months." Max looked angry at first, then his bottom lip began to quiver. His eyes welled with glassy tears. Mom and Dad got to work cleaning the corpse and blood. They'd wanted us to help, and I told them I would, in a minute. I followed the blood trail to the garage door, a splotch of black goo every few feet or so. Something was moving in the garage. I could hear it snuffling around, knocking into things. It couldn't have been a spider. It must have been as large as a raccoon. The door was ajar, and I slowly pushed it open. The garage was dark, even with the light on, and I didn't want to alarm the creature. A baseball bat had been resting near the doorway, and I lifted it to my shoulder as I moved stealthily forward, gliding toward the noise. A wet, chewing noise. No, not chewing. A crinkling sound like paper. Just ahead was a shelf of paint buckets, and behind them, a squirming silhouette. I raised the bat, took aim, and practiced a few mock swings. If I could nail one of the paint buckets in the right spot, I'd crush whatever was behind it. Sure, there'd be a mess, I thought, but this thing had killed my dog. This was for Yip Yap. I swallowed a breath and raised the bat high, preparing for one final swing. Just as I brought it down, "Ryan?" The noise surprised me, and the bat collided with a paint bucket, but the wrong one. Gray liquid gushed in every direction. Onto the wall, onto the shelf, onto me, onto the Dodge parked directly beside me. The writhing silhouette scampered, faster than I've ever seen any animal run, and contorted itself through a break below the splintering garage wall. In less than a moment's time, it was gone. I swore loudly and turned to see Max standing behind me. "I almost had him," I said. "You were going to kill him," said Max. "Of course I was. I said. "He killed Yip Yap. Whatever he is, he doesn't deserve to live in our home." I examined the paint dripping down the side of the car. "Oh man, how are we going to explain this to Mom and Dad?" Ryan." Max was aiming a finger behind me. The paint bucket I'd been aiming for had been overturned in all the chaos, revealing what was behind it. A glistening shape. Unmoving. I reached an arm behind the shelf and pinched the object between my thumb and forefinger, wincing at the texture. Cold and slimy. Holding it up, it was immediately apparent what this thing was, though I honestly couldn't believe it. I was holding the molted skin of a spider, the legs curled inward like that thing spiders do when they die. There were 8 legs on each side, 16 in total. "Ryan," said Max from somewhere far away, the fear in his voice distinctly palpable. "What is that?" "It's a spider skin," I whispered. "Some animals shed their skin. It's called molting." "Why do they do that?" "Because," I said, dropping the skin and shuddering, "they grew bigger." You might expect that things escalated quickly after that moment, but they didn't. It felt a little anticlimactic, but after that day, things went back to normal. Almost. Nearly a month later, we'd buried Yip Yap in the backyard, gotten Max a new dog, and I'd paid Dad for the new paint job we had done on the car. Max was back to bringing weird objects to show and tell, and he hadn't mentioned Shiny once since the incident in the garage. In fact, that month where nothing happened was punctuated only by the fact that Max sometimes became unaccounted for, disappearing for long amounts of time in which I had no clue where he went. I didn't care either. Maybe I didn't want to know. As far as I was concerned, that thing wasn't coming back anytime soon. And even though my nightmares of being attacked by a 16-legged spider were becoming more frequent, my real-life experiences were as good as average. My bliss finally ended when I looked out my bedroom window one day and saw Max leaving the tool shed at the edge of the field. He closed the door, locked it, and strode from view. Was that where he disappeared to all the time? Dad's tool shed? I reminded myself that I didn't care, and as long as Max was home in time for dinner, that was good enough for me. But a minute later, he returned to the shed carrying one of our full-grown chickens. He produced the shed key and looked around to make sure no one was watching. Rightfully so, since Dad would be furious if he found out Max had stolen the key. He was young, and Dad claimed he would hurt himself on the sharp tools if he got inside. Max opened the shed door, just wide enough to slip the chicken in. Then he locked it shut and headed back to the house. I stared out the window for a little while longer, but Max never returned. I wondered what he could possibly be up to by relocating the chickens to the shed, although it did explain why several had turned up missing over the past few weeks. I chalked it up to a wild animal taking them away, and even entertained the theory that Shiny returned to our property for a midnight snack every once in a while. Apparently, the culprit was my own brother. At dinner that night, my dad brought up the missing key. He said he couldn't find it, and he'd looked all over for it. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Max?" I said, giving my brother the classic "I know what you did" look. Max just shook his head, downed his glass of water in one gulp, and left the table. "Frank, maybe you should talk to him," Mom said to Dad. "He's been acting so strange ever since that dog died." My father was visibly uncomfortable, probably because it had become a taboo subject in our home to mention Yip Yap's death. It was so disturbing and offensively unexplainable that we'd come to an unspoken agreement not to mention it. "Maybe later," said Dad bluntly, and he left the table too. That night, once everyone else was sound asleep, I laid awake, my mind reeling with possibilities. Finally, my curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself sneaking into Max's room. The key was easy enough to find. He'd left it on his nightstand. He stirred when I picked it up, but never woke. Outside, the night was cool and windy. I switched on a flashlight I'd taken from the garage and trudged out to the shed. It stood before me, washed in blue moonlight, still and quiet. It was a peculiar feeling being out here at night, like how I imagined astronauts must feel while tethered to the shuttle, hanging by a thread over an expanse of infinity. At first, I didn't open the shed. I stood with my ear to it, listening. To no one's surprise, I could hear movement inside. I couldn't hear chickens, but what I did hear was something large, something much bigger than the thing that had scampered out of the garage a month ago. A low, guttural breath drawing in and out, in and out. I moved a shaking hand to the door latch, inserted the key, and turned it. My hand stayed there for a long time, unmoving. I found that I couldn't will it to move, so instead I counted to 10 and forced myself to open the door. My flashlight beam fell directly on the thing inside. Coiled in the shadows was a giant centipede, its antennas twitching in the air, its skin black and oily. Agitated by the flashlight, its body thrashed and the head surged toward me. Two massive pincers lusting for my neck. I managed to snap myself out of a trance and threw my weight against the door, shutting it tight. The creature's head collided with the wood, and the whole building shuddered as the monster screamed from within. It was the worst sound I had ever heard, like two steel blades grinding against one another. My trembling hands locked the door, and I tripped away, falling to the ground and crawling backward on my elbows, whimpering. "Stop!" called a voice from behind. "You're scaring him!" It was Max. He ran past me and put a hand to the door, consoling the creature inside. "Get away from that!" I yelled at him. "It's shiny," said Max. "He likes me, but only me. He won't hurt me, and he doesn't like light. Your flashlight scared him." The old shed rocked with each blow from the creature. The structure wouldn't last long, I knew, especially if the creature grew any larger. The wailing was incessant. "What is this?" I asked, getting to my feet. "Why are you feeding him?" "He's my pet," said Max indignantly. "I found him. He's mine." Another blow from the creature made the ground beneath me tremble. "You can't hold on to him any longer," I shouted over noise. "Max, you have to let go." "If you say so." Max bent low and picked up the key I'd dropped. Before my brain could register what he was doing, he had already unlocked the shed. I felt a horrific scream escape my throat as Max threw the doors wide. But the shed was empty. Other than the doors creaking on their hinges, the air was silent. At the far end of the shed was a jagged, gaping hole, and beyond it the wheat field swaying in the wind. I staggered forward on legs made of jelly. "We have to go after him," said Max. I gave him a horrified stare, because that was all I could manage. "It's the only way, Ryan," said Max. "If Shiny reaches a town, he could hurt people, maybe worse. If I'm with you, he won't hurt you. I'm the only one he'll listen to." He had a point about innocent people being in danger. Going after Shiny was the last thing I wanted to do, but Max had made up his mind and I couldn't let him go alone. And then again, part of me would be lying to say I didn't want to know how deep this rabbit trail went. There was no questioning which direction the creature escaped in. A trail of flattened wheat wound its way through the field where the centipede had snaked its way to freedom. For the next 15 minutes or so, we treaded the path side by side, me sweeping the flashlight in front of us, Max calling for the creature through cupped hands. "Shiny! Shiny!" "Will you cut it out?" I finally told him. "Maybe he doesn't hurt you, but calling his name isn't magically going to make him come crawling back to you. Ryan, even if he does come back to you, what are we going to do with him? Where is he going to go? You can't keep him anymore. He's too big for that now." "Ryan, I understand that you want to help him, Max, but we don't even know what we're dealing with." "Ryan, watch out!" Max grabbed the back of my shirt as my next step forward landed on nothingness. I looked down to see my right foot dangling over a black chasm and pinwheeled my arms before falling back. The wheat path ended here at a massive black hole in the ground. Shiny had tunneled into the earth. There was no telling where he could be by now. "How deep do you think it goes?" said Max as I shone the flashlight into the abyss. I shook my head. "I'm not sure, but do you hear that?" Something big was moving through a patch of trees to our left. I could hear tree trunks breaking, limbs snapping, a dense thicket tearing apart. The noise was growing louder, snowballing. I could see a dark shape moving just within the trees as a new sound reached my ears. Something mechanical, a machine. I stepped in front of Max and switched off the flashlight, bracing myself for a new monstrosity. Moments later, an armored tank emerged, its tracks rolling slowly over the rugged terrain, moving powerfully into the wheat field and continuing ahead of us. We watched the back of it grow smaller and smaller as it surged toward the horizon. Max said the thing we were both thinking. What just happened? His next words were drowned out by the scream of military jets soaring overhead in the direction of the tank. A distant shriek reverberated through the countryside, the sound of an enraged monster losing a fight against hundreds of gunshots, machine gun fire that popped and cracked sporadically. The sky plumed with orange light, and a worm-like beast rose into the air, flaming like a torch, as a harpoon speared the creature's middle and pulled it back to earth. One final cry echoed through the night, and then there was silence. Even in the darkness, I could see a hazy billow of smoke floating from the war zone. "Goodbye, Shiny," said Max, raising a hand in farewell. "It was nice knowing you." I put my arm around him and guided him back the way we came. When we got back to the shed, I inspected the damage. Nearly the entire back wall was gone, and the whole structure leaned precariously to one side. Inside, the shed was filled with Shiny's black slime and something else. Big, oval-shaped objects were plastered to the floor. There must have been 20 of them, no smaller than 3 feet in height. I leaned close to one. Through a translucent membrane, I could make out something moving within, a body curling and uncurling amid a gelatinous substance. "What are they?" said Max, giving one of the objects a small kick. "They're eggs," I breathed. Shiny wasn't a boy after all. I took a gas can from the corner of the shed and began to douse the floor and walls. Then, after Max and I were a good 10 feet away, I struck one of my father's spare matches and tossed it into the shed. The whole thing immediately went up in flames, and we squinted against the yellow light, feeling the warmth wash across us. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I thought I could hear faint squealing within the crackling of the fire, the screams of baby monsters joining their mother in eternity. Max rested his tired head on my arm, and that was how we stood for a long time, watching the flames lick toward the sky, only dimly aware, when our parents rushed out to meet us as the first signs of dawn broke across the horizon. I don't know much about government cover-ups, but what I do know is that I never heard about that night from anyone else, either on the news or from anyone in the surrounding area. If Max and I hadn't witnessed it, it might never have happened. Things were slow to go back to normal after that, but eventually the event became nothing more to me than a collection of memories and bad dreams I'd probably have for the rest of my life. A month later, it was something that stayed in the back of my mind, not forgotten, but no longer dominating my conscious thoughts. I still picked Max up from school every day and enjoyed learning about the things he brought for show and tell. As we pulled away from the school, I pointed to a new box he was now carrying in his lap. "What do you have today, Max?" "A scorpion. I found him in the parking lot this morning. All my friends thought Brainy was the coolest thing I've brought all year." "Brainy?" I asked. "Why do you call him that?" "Because he has 2 heads. And that's the story of how I got into my first car accident. They stalk the thicket and they aren't choosy about their prey. Well, that's pretty much the most horrible thing I've ever seen. It was the only thing I could think to say as I stood over the body of one of Bill Morton's calves. Bill stood behind me, nodding his head in utter agreement. He snorted hard and spat into the field before hiking up his pants. Apparently, this was the 3rd calf he'd lost in as many weeks. "Aliens!" His gruff voice hit my ears, and it didn't instantly register what he'd just said. "Aliens?" I repeated, looking away from the horrid state of the calf. "Yeah, aliens." His eyes were dead serious, so I avoided the smirk that was threatening to develop on my face. I saw a documentary about the kind of stuff they do to cows on YouTube. Nasty stuff. I knelt next to the animal. The grass was soaked in blood that was already drying in the summer heat. I could see puncture marks dotted on its hide that seemed to go in a straight line. Blood matted the fur in little circles around each wound. The calf's head looked as if it had been ripped apart, and most of the brain was missing. Also gone were the calf's tongue and eyes. No, Bill. I'd guess more likely this is an animal attack. I looked over all the wounds again and scratched my stubble. No offense to your keen detective skills, deputy, but what kind of animal does that? He got down next to me and pointed to the torn-apart skull. I can't rightly say, Bill. And I truly couldn't. I figured that an animal attack was far more likely than an alien cattle mutilation, but I'd be damned if I couldn't tell it all from the state of the calf. I'd seen my share of coyote attacks and even a few mountain lions. When you work as a sheriff's deputy in a ranch town, those calls are common. This didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. Of course you can't, Frank, because it's aliens, I'm telling you. He got back up with a wheeze and wiped the sweat from his brow. Them government boys in that facility outside of town, ask them. I'm sure they know all about it. The facility off the highway? I got up with him, shifting my gun belt and straightening my uniform as I did so. It's the Department of Agriculture, Bill. I don't think they are going to know much about aliens. Sure they don't. And I don't know much about whiskey and Johnny Cash tunes. He paused for a moment and snorted again. I know a lot about those things. I got that, I responded, the smirk finally breaking through on my face enough to elicit an annoyed reaction from old Bill. I decided to smooth things over with an offer. We'll round up with fish and game to see if we can't get some people out here to help us hunt down your calf killer. In the meantime, how about I stop by after work and we beat the bushes ourselves? See if we can't solve this issue a bit sooner? Bill's eyes scanned the thicket before he nodded. All right, deputy, but I'm telling you that I don't think we're going to find nothing unless we look to the skies. He slipped his thumbs into his belt and looked up at the midday sky. I laughed to myself and clapped Bill on the shoulder. I was still taking it all with some measure of calm, back when I thought the worst it could be was some rogue wolf or mountain lion. I didn't know at the time what we would find stalking around that thicket and in the trees, and if I had, I might have just grabbed the gas can from my patrol vehicle and set the whole darn place ablaze. Bill thinks it's what? Terry laughed and looked at me with wide-eyed surprise. Terry was a fellow deputy and longtime friend. He'd offered to help me and Bill look for the predator that was going after any of Bill's calves that wandered too close to the thicket. We'd loaded up my truck with a couple of lever-action .30-30 rifles and some extra ammo. No kidding, the guy thinks it's aliens. I took the turn onto the road that led to Bill's property. Bill's freaking out there, man. Dude's a riot. Terry paused and let out a contemplative, Though I have to say, the way you describe it, I can't exactly tell you what we're looking for. I wish I could give you a better clue, but I'm just as stumped as you. The truck's headlights illuminated the front of Bill's ranch, and I slowed to a stop. A big cat would have dragged it off, coyotes would have eaten its guts, same with a wolf. There aren't any bears around here, and I'm pretty sure they don't kill like that. He undid his seatbelt and shook his head like he was trying to jostle the answer loose. Crap, maybe it is aliens, he said with a laugh. It's not freaking aliens, I chuckled back as I jumped out of the truck. Don't you be so sure, deputy, I heard Bill's gruff voice boom out of the darkness as he walked from the side of his house to greet us. He was wearing his hunting oranges and carrying a 12-gauge. A headlamp was strapped to his balding head. His old retriever, Bootsy, walked at his heel. Even a dumb cowpuncher like me is smart enough to understand there is stuff out there beyond my understanding. Oh, of that I'm sure. Terry pulled one of the .30-30s out of the back of the truck and threw it over his shoulder. The universe is a big place, boys. Bill looked up at the night sky, either ignoring or oblivious to Terry's joke. No telling what's out there. Well, Bill, I pulled the other .30-30 from the back of the truck and started loading it. Right now, I'm a bit more concerned with what's out in that thicket than what's hiding among the stars. Fair enough. Bill did his trademark snort and then spat into the dirt. He switched on the headlamp and shouldered his shotgun. Y'all ready? Bootsy, clearly noticing his master was ready to go, ran up ahead towards the field and looked back at us. He did a quick run in a circle as if to tell us to hurry the hell up. Let's go bag us a... Terry paused and looked at both Bill and myself with a shrug. Freaking alien, I guess. Terry and I laughed, and Bill grunted as we walked across the field towards the thicket, Bootsy leading the way. We walked the edge of the thicket, shining our flashlights while looking to see if we could catch signs of anything stalking around the underbrush. Bootsy ran back and forth, sniffing at the edge of the bushes and occasionally stopping to pee and let whatever was inside know that he'd been there. "So, what did Fish and Game say?" Bill whispered to me as he dropped down with a huff and looked into an opening between the tall bushes. "They transferred me around a bunch. Hell, by the end, I'm not sure I was talking to someone at Fish and Game. When they finally got me talking to the person they wanted me talking to, he said they'd be sending someone out right away. I thought I saw something shift behind the brush and looked in further. My voice got even quieter, but I finished my thought. Decided it was still better to just come out and look around ourselves tonight. You know, the government, right away, could mean a few weeks. Oh, I'm sure they'll send someone out sooner than that." Bill got back to his feet and adjusted the lamp on his head. "They don't want to give us too much time poking around out here." "I'm sure you're quite right, Bill." I laughed again and looked further up the thicket to see Terry standing extremely close to the thick bushes. At first, I thought he was looking at something, but I noticed his flashlight was down by his side. Bootsy came sprinting up past me at blinding speed and ran towards Terry while barking his head off. I started running towards Terry as well, with Bill jogging his best shortly behind me. As Terry came closer into view, I could see the look on his face. His eyes were wide with terror and his lips were pulled back into an awful grimace. He looked as if he wanted nothing more than to scream, but for some reason it was frozen in the back of his throat and choking him. His arms were at his sides, one hand holding the flashlight and the other balled into a tight fist. The 30-30 was still slung over his shoulder, and the question as to why he hadn't pulled it flashed through my mind before I noticed exactly why. His arms were pinned to his side by something that my mind couldn't even start to process. At first I thought they were giant leaves or branches. Their dark green color matched the surrounding thicket almost perfectly. There were two of them, at least 4 feet long, that had wrapped around Terry's body in what looked like an uninvited embrace. What in the freaking hell? I stopped dead in my tracks, startled as the things wrapped around Terry suddenly squeezed tighter and an audible hiss filled the air. "Don't get any closer," Terry shouted, his voice in utter panic. Bootsy barked around his feet now, and the hiss in the air got louder. Tears streaked his face as he tried to turn his head to look in my direction. "Oh God, man, please, please, get this dog away from me. It doesn't like the dog." "Bootsy, heel!" I heard Bill's voice behind me, somehow firm but shaky at the same time. He drew in a deep breath. Bootsy continued barking wildly at whatever had a hold of Terry. I realized what was holding Terry so firmly were massive chitinous appendages like insect legs. I stood in utter shock, my eyes just barely making out the massive shape hiding in the darkness of the tall, thick shrubbery. The thing squeezed him tighter, and I could see blood streaking down his arms. "Oh God, please, freaking help me!" Terry's voice was laced with such a horrible terror it woke me from my trance. I raised my rifle to my shoulder and tried to find an angle to take a shot where I wasn't going to risk putting a bullet in my friend. "Bootsy, heel now!" Bill shouted again, taking a step to the side of me but not daring to get any closer to Terry. The hiss filled the air again. Bill continued yelling for his dog. Terry screamed his head off. The thing in the bushes hissed and chittered. Through all of this, I took aim at a shadow I could barely see and pulled the trigger. The sound of the gun echoed through the night sky like thunder. I had missed, the bullet striking nothing but branches and whizzing past the thing as it yanked Terry forward into the thicket. I could hear his screams as it dragged him along through the underbrush. The whole thing happened so gosh darn fast I didn't even notice Bootsy leap through the hole made by Terry's body and give chase. I gripped my rifle and followed closely behind the retriever, Bill following as close as he was capable of. The branches scraped and cut at my skin as I ran. It was pulling Terry so quickly that even Bootsy was having trouble keeping up. "What in the name of Johnny's ghost is that thing?" Bill growled out from behind me, a wheeze both preceding and following his question. I didn't answer. I didn't know. I just ran and listened to my friend scream. His screams were getting further away from me, and I wondered how in the name of God it could move so darn fast. Then suddenly the screams stopped and my heart jumped into my throat. Bootsy had vanished somewhere into the darkness in front of me. He was still barking at the thing that took Terry, but the barks echoed throughout the thicket and I couldn't tell exactly where they were coming from. We'd run far enough in that trees were sprouting up from the ground around us, and it felt like I was in a maze and making myself increasingly lost with every second. "We have to go back, Frank. We have to call someone," Bill shouted. "I'm telling you, that thing isn't some normal animal. It isn't from around here. Would you shut the hell up about your stupid, gosh darn alien crap?" I turned on my heel and screamed at him before turning my flashlight back towards the brush in front of me. I didn't see any signs of Terry or the thing that had taken him. Somewhere off in the distance, Bootsy's barks turned into high-pitched, whimpering yelps overlaid over the top of that horrid hissing sound that it made. Then Bootsy was silent too. I looked at Bill's face, his eyes filling with tears at what was likely the sound of his dog's last moments. The night had become deathly quiet in only a matter of seconds. The air was still and warm against my bleeding skin as my ears hunted for any sound of movement around us. "Bill," I whispered, reaching out to him slowly and putting my hand on his shoulder. "We need to go. We need to go now." Bill silently gripped his shotgun with white knuckles. When his eyes drifted to me, he seemed a million miles away. "Bill," I said a little louder and firmer. "Did you hear me, man? We have to go." There was more hissing, followed by what sounded like chirps and clicks. From behind Bill, I could see something rise out of the brush wreathed in shadow. It stood at least 6 feet tall as it straightened up. 2 huge insectoid claws protruded from the front of its body. They were bent forward at the halfway point, and the creature held them in front of it as if in prayer. No freaking way, I thought to myself as Bill turned on his heel at the presence he sensed behind him. His headlamp illuminated the massive green insect and brought it into full view. Its diamond-shaped head held 2 bulbous eyes that looked directly at us, and 2 antennae that had to measure at least 2 feet in length. Mandibles flicked up and down at the point of its jaw, making a clicking noise. It lowered the posture of its long body, the rest of its legs bending to bring it closer to our level as it let out a horrible hiss. Bill shrieked and raised his 12-gauge to fire, but it, what I now could see, was a massive mantis, impossible as that may seem, lurched forward and dug the spines of its forelegs into him, causing his shot to go wild. I raised my gun, but by the time it was leveled at the creature, it had already lowered its head to Bill and begun digging its mandibles into his skull. Bill's screams were so loud that I could still hear them as I pulled the trigger on the .30-30 and fired. The bullet struck the side of its face, and even in the low light, I saw one of its eyes explode. I half expected it to drop, but Bill's screams continued, and instead of falling, the mantis just squeezed Bill even tighter with its forelegs and dragged him backwards away from me at a surprising speed. I let off 2 more rounds, but its thin body was hiding in the brush and it was waving Bill around like a human shield. It was like the darn thing understood. It vanished into the darkness, and Bill's screams went silent shortly thereafter. That horrible chewing sound is still something I hear when I close my eyes. In that moment, knowing that my friends had been eaten by these things, my mind shattered. I ran down the path we'd made on our way through the thicket as fast as my legs could move me. I didn't bother to look back. I didn't want to see what was following me. I could hear more clicks and see more moving shadows all around me as I ran. With every single branch that scraped me, I wondered if it was the claw of one of those freaking things getting ready to drag me off and devour me alive. I could hear the hissing, but also the hum of engines and sight of lights out in the field. Overhead, I heard the thrumming of a helicopter passing over us. I burst through the thicket and into the previously empty field, now filled to the brim with black SUVs and men in hazmat suits setting up lights. A man who looked like a park ranger came running up to me and screaming for another group behind him to hold their fire. I was in complete shock and hadn't even noticed the group of men leveling AR-15s in my direction. As soon as the man touched my arm, I blacked out. I woke up in a blindingly white room. I could hear the hustle of people running around outside, and as I surveyed my surroundings, I realized I was inside a tent. I attempted to get up from the cot I had been laid on, but a hand gently touched my shoulder and I heard a woman's voice. "Easy now, just take it easy." I blinked a few times, trying to get my eyes adjusted to the light. A woman in a lab coat moved around in front of me as I got into a sitting position and rubbed my face with my hands. "Where the hell am I?" I dropped my hands and looked to the woman who was now leaning on a shaky fold-up table with laptops and paperwork scattered across it. She had a shock of red hair pulled up high and held in place by pencils. Her glasses sat low on her nose. She looked to a soldier that was positioned behind her and nodded, a gesture he returned before stepping out of the tent. "Your name is Franklin Beaumont? You are..." No, she scanned a clipboard in her hand. "You are a sheriff's deputy in this area?" "Yeah," I answered quietly, looking around the room at machinery I didn't understand. "Who are you?" "I'm Dr. McDonald, Karen McDonald. I'm Dr. Karen." She extended a hand that was as awkward as her reply, and I reached out and shook it. "And you are still on site?" "Site?" I asked, not having any idea what she was talking about. "About 100 yards from where you collapsed." She looked down at her clipboard again. "It was probably just shock. You've been through a terribly traumatic experience, Mr. Beaumont. Do you remember?" It all flooded back. Terry and Bill, Bootsy, the mantis that had torn them apart. I fought back tears and nearly bit a hole into my lip. Dr. Karen simply stared at me with inquisitive green eyes and scribbled something further on her stupid clipboard. "Of course, I remember," I finally said. "Those freaking things killed them." "Wolves! Wolves, Mr. Beaumont!" A man in a blue suit walked into the room. His hair was slicked back, and he wore a practiced smile. "Not things. You've been through a major trauma, and we just want to make sure that you're not misremembering things." "I'm remembering just fine." I gruffly spoke to the man as he walked around to the same side of the folding table as Dr. Karen, and two soldiers with AR-15s followed closely behind him. He stood in front of me with his arms crossed, waiting for me to continue. What I saw was not a freaking wolf. "Of course it was, Mr. Beaumont. What else would it have been?" He looked at Dr. Karen and she shrugged. I saw instantly what was going on, as the two soldiers behind the man in the blue suit looked nervous. "I don't know." I hung my head, suddenly very uncomfortable and scared. The mantis obviously had some connection to whoever these people were, and they were not playing around. Mr. Blue Suit and Dr. Karen were the handshake and the smile. The men behind them were the much tougher form of negotiation. "We are deeply sorry about your friends. Know that we at the United States Department of Agriculture give you our word that we will take care of this pack of wolves and ensure that no one will ever be hurt by them again." The man in the blue suit grabbed a binder off the table and held it out in his hand. "Department of Agriculture." I laughed into my hands. "You guys are from the freaking Department of Agriculture?" I laughed again and looked at the soldiers with their guns and black night ops uniforms. "Yes, Mr. Beaumont." The blue suit man pushed the binder into my hands. "Who else would we be?" I spent the rest of the night signing papers saying that my friends and I had tracked the wolves to the thicket where we'd been attacked. I was to decline any interviews on the subject, and if pressed, I was to toe the line on the official story. I can still remember the plastic smile on the face of the man in the blue suit. He gave artificial condolences as they sent me on my way. Dr. Karen gave more genuine ones, but they rang hollow. That night, I drank a fifth of bourbon alone in my apartment and cried myself to sleep. There was never any direct threat made against me to keep my mouth shut. They made the cars that followed me and the men parked outside my home noticeable enough that they never needed to make any kind of direct threat. I could only imagine what government agency the blue suit man was actually from, but I knew when there was a gun to my temple, and I doubted very seriously that the Department of Agriculture was holding it. That's why I'm sharing this story here and leaving out the details. I can't keep it inside anymore, and if I go anywhere official, then I'm a dead man. I know what I saw out there, though, and it sure as hell wasn't wolves. Our government grew something. I don't know if it escaped or if they let it loose on their own, but they are most certainly responsible. I drive out towards Bill's old ranch sometimes, and I can see the lights of whatever makeshift area they still have set up out there. The whole thing is surrounded with a massive fence now. Signs hang on it every 30 feet. No trespassing. By order of the United States Department of Agriculture. Bill didn't have any family, so it was easy for them to swoop in and take the place for themselves without some nosy relatives wondering what happened to him, or why the government was stealing their land. I'll stand out by that fence sometimes and smoke cigarettes and listen. I'll listen to their trucks driving in and out from the drive and the hustle of men doing whatever those men do out there now. I'll also hear that hiss, that awful hiss. But sometimes I wonder if that's just all in my head. All I know for sure is that there were no wolves out there that night, but there is most certainly something stalking the thicket on Bill Morton's old property. Something that isn't choosy about its prey.